with LA County. I know that today LA County decided to not have a curfew. The city of Santa Clarita decided last night, or rather 2 nights ago, at their city council meeting as to whether or not they should just go ahead with a curfew for Thursday, because they already had scares from people and residents out here that were very concerned about rioting and looting and, you know, posting if they should bring their guns to any protests. And the city basically acquiesced to what those people had to say, and it ended up being, it just ended up being a shit show in that specific regard. What ended up transpiring today ended up being one of the biggest protests I have ever seen in Santa Clarita. I've covered them in regards to refugees and, people who, they're not anti-immigrant. They're, people that do look at the United States as, the American dream personified. And so they would protest stuff like that outside City Hall, but never before has there been anything quite like these really large Black Lives Matter protests that have been just beautiful to watch. If I got to be completely honest, everybody is so angry with just about everything going on, and it just kind of seems as if this is finally that anger getting to come out, and people are trying to find some kind of closure for themselves. And hopefully we'll have that by year's end. Although I did just see a meme that was like, what could happen if December 31st, 2020, and instead of ending with 11:59 p.m., it goes to 11:60 p.m., and thus it's still 2020.
I wouldn't even be shocked.
I feel like that could happen.
I feel like, and I said this off air to a homegirl of mine, I honestly feel like we're living in the part between the after Thanos snapped and Wakanda and like right before Endgame started. Like that's what we're living. Like we're literally living in the upside down if the upside down just went straight to hell.
Oh, that's just it. To think of a time period quite like this in American history, it's hard, because even going back to just, the first Great Depression, people, when they learn about the Great Depression, they never seem to always understand what the root causes of that were. Whereas with every subsequent economic crisis we've had in this country, we're documenting so we have a finger that we can point at and blame. And, in 2008 and now we have definitive answers. It's just, where do we then go from there? And then you drag in everything else going on in regards to the protests, and, there's a lot of calls for change that I side with and I admire, and then there's definitely a few calls here and there from left-wing groups that I may be favorable to, where I'm thinking, okay, there's ideology, but then there's also rationale. And just because it's something you believe in doesn't mean it's something that you're going to get a broad spectrum of people to join you in believing in, because it's a radical idea. So it's kind of been manic, processing everything and then factoring in the 2020 election. Just kind of imagining the rest of the year is pretty brutal.
We're only 6 months and 3 and 4 days in.
Yeah. It's insane, man.
Didn't one of his military advisors just step down today? Said shouldn't follow Trump?
I had heard it was. I don't know if it was today, but I know that the former Secretary of Defense, James Mad Dog Mattis, basically said Trump's dividing this country. This is bad. Hello, everybody. This has all been one big mistake. And, it's just kind of a brief rundown on Trump's history with Mattis, because Trump picked the guy to be Secretary of Defense because he had the nickname Mad Dog. Okay, fine. He gets into the job, fine. Trump then would later bring him up during a rally, and he would then claim that he made up the nickname Mad Dog. He took the credit for it, even though he didn't even know who the guy was except for his nickname. And then he fires him after the guy's been literally the most sober man in the whole presidential cabinet, who has to shake Trump down into understanding why we have trade agreements with South Korea is to prevent World War III. And then following all of that and following his removal from his position, it's opportune, but, it's not necessarily something that is, I think a lot of people should be paying attention to. I certainly think Trump supporters need to hear it, because, to be a conservative and go against the military, that's antithetical. That doesn't happen. That shouldn't exist.
Kind of like
and
a non-lethal bullet.
You got some. Say that again.
I said it should exist like a non-lethal bullet. It's an oxymoron.
Yeah. So.
Oh man, anything else you want to add before we go?
Yeah, very quickly. I guess to kind of hash out in regards to today's protests, it was massive. It was beautiful. It was all over the region. And, I know that there's a few more protests planned out here over the next coming days, as well as, allegedly protests being planned from now until, August. So it's a lot of information out there, and, figuring out what's true and what isn't is just step one. But at my end, I have a new episode of my show, Mars on Life, that will be dropping sometime tomorrow.
Did you just announce a mixtape drop, fam?
I'm sorry?
Did you just announce your mixtape dropping on the podcast again?
Oh, yeah.
Respect.
But, we, Sebastian and I had a pretty solid, sober discussion with three people that I've known over the course of my life. One of them knows us, so you'll hear, you guys might hear your names mentioned whenever me and this specific guest talk. It's all good. Don't worry. No slander.
No conflicts of interest.
Well, I mean, we are conflicts of interest. You and I, and Pete, and the guest that I had, and even another guest that I had. But it was a good episode, and I'm looking forward to people getting a chance to hear it. It's something that we never thought we would go with the podcast, but you know what? History is flying by you, and you can't just sit back and ignore.
Very well said. Very well said. Have a safe night, Mancini. I'm pretty sure Uber Eats doesn't go to Black Bear Diner, but if they did, I would order from them. So be safe out there, man.
You got it. You too.
Thanks. Oh, man. Wow. Again, shout out to... Damn, I'm blind. Shout out to Clutch Conversations in the chat and Ryan. And no one's going to remember that I totally, fucked up that line. Except Pete and probably my mom. Speak of the devil and he appears. Hello, caller. What's your name? And where you calling from? And take
This
me
is
off speaker.
PD Camarillo, the other half of Touchdowns and Tangents. I'm calling from my girl's room in Lawndale.
Why are you snitching, bro? Your girl didn't ask you to say her room. Like you, the king of the drop snitch, Pete Camarillo, right here. Weird flex, but okay.
We're just laughing about your obsession with Black Bear Diner.
Nah, I kind of want to go there, you asshole.
That should be a drinking. That should be a drinking game. Drink every time Kenny said Black Bear Diner this episode.
This podcast is a drinking game. You didn't know that? We're socially woke, but really we just hit it inside of a drinking game.
But yeah, man, I don't want to bullshit too much because we're up on time, and I know you still want to wrap up, but just wanted to say I don't think you played my message, but I didn't listen to the first 5 minutes. But yeah,
it's not pulling
I pretty much said it on the overtime edition. If you want to go and listen to it, but basically, I've been going back and forth on it all week. On one hand, want to go out there and stuff. On the other hand, I'm just trying to be conscious to COVID and even just kind of speaking on it and doing this episode, as a content creator, on one hand, you want to help people escape, especially because there's so much of it right now, just across mainstream media, social media, your group chats, like your people, like that's all we're talking about. So it's like on one hand, you want to provide 2 hours of like something else, and I think that's kind of what the initial goal was with the wrestling episode, at least for the COVID. And then the world set on fire, and history started happening, and so it becomes a situation to where it's like, well, we have to talk about this, and not in the fact that everyone else is in terms of like it's news. We have to talk about it because we've been talking about it. And, if you go through our archives, they don't lie. We're on the right side of history. We've been talking about this for really the inception of this show and the previous show before that. Hold up, sorry. But yeah, so it's like, well, now we can't not talk about it when everyone else is talking about it. We can't just ignore it either. And so for me, I just kind of just figured, you know what, I'm just going to relinquish myself from it and just let, other people talk for me. And I'm just going to, listen and continue to support and push the people that I can up because, as many people know who listen to this podcast, I've been going through my own personal things and also just, living my regular life, dealing with my regular work and money and food problems. So just been trying to get in the right space to really feel like I can talk about it because, just thinking about, Kenny, thinking about, Torian, thinking about, Shane, my boy, Shane Robeson, who we've been through shit like this together, thinking about my boy, Justin Rayside, who's been on the show, thinking about Brian Williams, thinking about Josh Mitchell, these athletes, these community people who use their platform, and just thinking about them dying like unexpectedly, or and just not even for me, but just thinking about what that would cost their communities and their families, like is crushing, and to see that and to feel that, and then to just also see who's being tone deaf to it, or see who's not reacting to it, and it just kind of, it's a lot, and sometimes it feels like we're just talking amongst ourselves, and it's like, we've been having this conversation for 3 years. It's like, why do we have to keep having it? Are we just talking to the same people? Like, what is it? What am I doing that's wrong? And it's like, and then you factor in the fact that we're losing our favorite rappers, but